The video footage that came out showing the launching of two long-range rockets, one of them landed just off the coast near Tel Aviv in the Mediterranean, so a far-reaching rocket, just showed on the one hand how they still have these significant capabilities. They still present a threat, even though we are more than 10 months into this war. So as Israel prepares and definitely is on a knife's edge for the prospect of an Iranian Hezbollah attack, retaliations for that double targeted killing of top Hezbollah and Hamas commanders, one in Beirut and one in Tehran just 2 weeks ago, we kind of got a reminder the other day that the Gaza war is still here, and Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the two primary terrorist organizations in Gaza, are still with capabilities. You have Israel basically has yet to completely eliminate all of those sophisticated and advanced capabilities. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, you watch this video and you see that they are setting up the launchers from within displaced Palestinian tent encampments. These are humanitarian zones. These are areas that Israel refrains from attacking. This is supposed to be a safe space. But we see once again what Israel has been claiming since the beginning of this conflict, which is that Hamas and Islamic Jihad, they don't periodically use civilian areas for attacks. That is their modus operandi. That is their strategy. That's how they operate. And this is just another illustration of their cynical use of their own people. So when the world looks and then questions, how is it that Israel bombs what we thought was a school and people get killed? How is it that Israel attacks a civilian-looking apartment building and people get killed? This is how Hamas and Islamic Jihad operate. They use and purposely, intentionally embed their weaponry inside these places because they want Israel to attack. They want civilians to, unfortunately and tragically, get killed. Israel does its best to minimize that, but this is just another example of how these enemies operate. Iran seems to continue to be determined to attack Israel in retaliation for the killing of the Hamas leader Haniyeh in Tehran a couple weeks ago. Hezbollah also appears to be determined to attack Israel in a more larger way, let's call it, since Israel eliminated Fuad Shukar, the senior Hezbollah military commander, in a bombing in Beirut also about 2 weeks ago. And the Middle East is bracing for what might come here. What we've seen and why it's taken so long is because not only has Israel said we would retaliate in a big way if we are attacked in a way that is bigger than what we've seen in the past, but the Americans have amassed within the region an unprecedented military force. From the USS Lincoln, an aircraft carrier strike group, to a number of destroyers, to F-22 and F-15 squadrons, to a nuclear-powered submarine, the USS Florida, you have amazing armada and a deployment of forces that I don't think we've seen, definitely not since October 7th, when President Biden gave his famous don't speech and dispatched a large contingent to the region. But this might even be surpassing that force at this point. And this is part of America's way to, on the one hand, deter the Iranians from doing something big, but on the other hand, also to provide Israel with an umbrella of defense if that attack does happen. We remember in April that when Iran did attack Israel with about 350 drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles, there was a coalition that came together, led by the Americans, that intercepted, together with the Israelis and the French and the British and the Jordanians and the Saudis, that intercepted about 99% of all of those different projectiles. Iran, though, despite all of that, continues to say that it will attack. And every day here in Israel, there is a heightened sense of anxiety. And it's true that on the fast day that took place on Tuesday in Israel, started Monday night, Tuesday, known as the 9th of Av, which is the Hebrew month of Av, marks and commemorates the destruction of the two Jewish temples about 2,000 plus years ago here in Jerusalem. There was a sense that the Iranians might attack, and people got nervous that night because of the symbolism. And the fact that why would Iran might want to take advantage of this holy day for the Jewish people, but a day that is known in history as being a day of tragedy, and try to compel Israel or force Israel into another tragedy. That did not happen, but Israel remains vigilant because this attack could come at any moment and could lead to a much wider conflict here in the Middle East. I mean, there's no doubt that there is a large or a heightened sense of vigilance, not just within Israel and in Lebanon, of course, where there's been a lot of people who have been fleeing the country, but also among the main superpowers that operate in this region, the Americans and the French and the British, of course. We saw that Prime Minister Starmer had a conversation earlier this week with the new president of Iran to try to de-escalate. So we're seeing a lot of efforts that are being made by different countries to try to prevent this conflict from spiraling out of control. The Americans have sent a amphibious vessel fleet, that the WASP vessels they're called, to the region. They're sitting in the Eastern Mediterranean, and they carry with them several thousand soldiers, including Marines, and the ability to kind of come up along a beach coastline and evacuate people as required. Primarily, the concern would be for Lebanon in, I think, the American case, because of the fact that if Israel were to come under massive rocket and missile attack from Hezbollah, Israel would have no choice but to launch a fierce and aggressive response against all of Lebanon, where those rockets are. And America would want to get the non-combatants, definitely its own citizens, out of that country. We would see probably something similar from the British and the French. I'm not sure about what would happen in Israel. We've never really seen a mass evacuation of foreign nationals from Israel. In previous wars, there were cases where special aircraft came in, people wanted to leave. Definitely the foreign dignitaries, embassy officials, things along those lines. Dual citizens, Israeli, British, Israeli, American, Israeli, French. We've never seen a mass evacuation. But then on the other hand, we've never seen, I think, a war the likes of which we potentially would face if there would be an all-out conflict here. Then Israel would come under a missile onslaught from Iran directly, from Hezbollah in Lebanon with its 150,000 rockets and missiles, from the Houthis in Yemen, from Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. So if that scenario does play out in the worst case option, we could see a lot of different things that we've never seen before. If, God forbid, there were to be a wider or bigger war with Hezbollah, and let's just remember, there has been a war going on since October 8th when Hezbollah began attacking Israel. But it's been launching its missiles and unmanned drones within about 20, 30 kilometers of the border, and Israel has been attacking in Lebanon in a similar range and radius. So it's all been isolated to northern Israel and to southern Lebanon. It's except for rare scenarios where it goes a little deeper. But for the most part, this has been the case for the last 10 months. If Hezbollah were to unleash a massive rocket attack against central Israel, and Israel were to retaliate in a big way, we would see three things happen immediately, I think. The first would be Gaza would fall to the side. It would be of much less importance. Anyhow, after 10 months, Hamas's capabilities have mostly been degraded. Israel would, of course, have to keep some forces in the Gaza Strip and along the Gaza Strip to continue to deny Hamas the ability to rebuild and to attack Israel, but it would not be of the scope and scale of what we're seeing now. All those forces would be moved up to the northern front. The second thing we would see is mass bombings throughout all of Lebanon. People tend to think back to the 2006 Second Lebanon War, when the last time Israel and Lebanon and Hezbollah fought. But then Hezbollah had deployed its missiles pretty much all in the south of Lebanon. Because of the great change that has taken place in the 15 plus years since, the Hezbollah, it's almost 18 years now, Hezbollah has been able to deploy its missiles now that have longer ranges and greater firepower all throughout Lebanon. So any war would basically be a war in all of Lebanon. Israel would have to target targets all throughout Lebanon, in the north, in the center, and in the south. It would also likely have to send in ground forces to push back those Hezbollah forces that are still deployed along the Israeli border, to deny them the ability to cross into Israel to try to carry out mass killings like what Hamas did on October 7th. So it would be, again, moving forces from the south and the whole focus to the north, mass bombardments of targets all across Lebanon. Israel would not have the time to be able to move people from the north of Lebanon to the south of Lebanon, or south of Lebanon to the north, like what we saw in Gaza, because of the great amount of rockets and missiles that Hezbollah has. We're talking about 150,000. We're talking about a capability of launching over 5,000 plus rockets and missiles all across Israel a day. Israel would not be able to sustain that over time. It would overwhelm the missile defense systems that we have, Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow. We would not have enough interceptors. So you would have devastation within the Israeli home front, unlike what we've seen before, which would require Israel to attack back aggressively and to send in ground forces to push back those Hezbollah forces. This is a very bad scenario, and this is why we have not seen this happen until now, despite the last 10 months of constant Hezbollah fire, because Israel is trying to avoid that war, which would be devastating for Israel, but I would just say even more devastating for Lebanon.